Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and I'm here with your co-host Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, I feel like we don't touch base enough, but I'm really excited to hear. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm not sure. I don't think this was the case last time we recorded, but I gave up coffee, and it's been a rough go for the past 2 weeks. But I'm thriving and surviving. Those of you who are on the YouTube version, I'm drinking a lot of water each day. A lot of water. Maybe Sabrina can post that on our socials. But doing well regardless. But yeah, this bi-weekly podcast thing, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
It's definitely got some disadvantages. It's probably got some other advantages, but I will say, looking at your bottle of water, are you on schedule? So it's one of the bottles
behind schedule.
I was gonna say you looked a little behind schedule. So I will be honest with you. Kudos to you for trying to give up the coffee. Small insight of that I am a human being. I used to smoke. Please don't do that. It's a terrible habit. I have since quit, but quitting smoking was tremendously easy in comparison to giving up caffeine. So I didn't. I still drink lots of coffee. But anyway, just small PSA out there for the world. Coffee's delicious. Don't smoke. Something like that. All right. So for today's show, we want to talk about adult learning theory. Now, I know we've kind of touched on this subject a little bit in some of our past episodes, but we thought it'd be kind of a good time to dive back in a little bit and spend a little bit more focus on what is it, what are some of the barriers that are typically found when you're talking about adult learning theory, and then how do we maybe overcome some of those, give you some tactical knowledge around the concept a little bit. So the majority of the folks who probably listen to the podcast typically, I'm guessing, are working in the professional sphere. So adults are typically the individuals that you're going to have in your learning rooms. So let's talk about it a little more. Let's dive right in. I find it's always good to start at the beginning. So let's begin with, what is adult learning theory? Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you. We have a reading with Daniel segment that we're going to go with. So Daniel has the actual definition here that he can read for everybody, and then we'll try to decompose what all that is and put it in layman's terms.
All right. Daniel's definition of learning and development. Adult learning theory is the process of adults learning new information and skills. In addition to there being a difference in motivation and enthusiasm between adult learners and children, there's also an obvious difference in level of existing knowledge. So adult learning theory is really how mature adults whose brain is completely mature learn and understand and digest new information.
Well done, Daniel. Well done. Yeah. Look, we try to give you more of a dictionary definition of things because it's easier than trying to make it up as we go. So we give you that as a context, but let's talk about it a little bit. So we talk about the difference. Typically, when we're talking about adult learning theory, we all were children at one point. That's how that works as we grow up. At one point, you had to start at the beginning there too. And you learn a certain way as a child. We'll talk about some of the barriers that come up as an adult and the way things change. But the way you learn as an adult, your factors are different. Your environment is different. Your experience is different. Your education level is different. Your influences from others, I think, is very different. We can talk a little bit about that, I think. But adults do learn differently. We have to sort of acknowledge that and understand those differences in order to become successful in delivering content and training to adults.
Yeah, I think, to add just as a definition a little bit, we all, I look back to the podcast we recorded with your kids, Scott, and had them on and had their thoughts, and we saw how free their mind is, and typically everything we know and all the decisions we make are based upon kind of preconceived notions, potentially. So I love the idea of adult learning theory and how to drive through the noise, because it's important in the roles that we're in, and to help change behaviors.
Yeah, I wanted to touch really quickly on that kind of that notion. It's not something we'll talk about necessarily as a barrier, but it's one of the things that does impact adult learning theory. Is you call it noise, I think is a good word, and there's a lot of noise that exists everywhere. And as an adult, I think that noise level goes up significantly. But if you think about children, we all had friends and we all went to school, and we tried to absorb information as much as you can. As a child, you were definitely a sponge, right? You're trying to get as much, even if you're not intentionally doing it. It's constantly hitting your brain, and you're making connections. We'll talk about that in a minute as we talk about barriers as an adult. But the people around you don't know a lot more than you do, right? So they're not able to give you informed opinions or teach you things as a child. So I'm looking at thinking of my fourth and my second grader, and their friends tell them a lot of stuff, but they immediately don't really have a frame of reference, and they know their friends don't really know any more than they do intellectually on a lot of topics. As they're getting older, that is becoming less and less true, but they don't necessarily take that as fact. As adults, the people that are around you now have opinions. They have their own experiences, and we acknowledge that. And I think critical thinking in that sense, and really understanding like what's the stuff I should take out of this as fact. Do I know that Billy is a bit of an exaggerator on everything, and those stats he's giving me probably aren't accurate? Like, we start to have to think that way, and that in and of itself is something we're not going to spend a ton of time on probably, but it is something to consider as an adult. They're getting a lot of voice from their peers that's going to conflict with you in some ways that kids just don't have. Their friends are telling them stories about alligators underneath the bed that just, they go, yeah, that's not a thing, right? So much easier for them to sort of disseminate what's truth and fact, so, or false. All right, so now we know a little bit more around what adult learning theory is. We can kind of build the basis in our own brains for what the conversations we're about to talk about. But we want to spend some time on, when we think about those adults now, right, as opposed to children, what are the barriers that get into play that we're going to eventually have to overcome? So first, let's define some of those barriers, talk through why they exist and how they exist, and then we'll spend our last segment of the day talking about what you can do to overcome some of those. So I'll kick it off. We looked up a really fun word that makes us sound really, really smart, and I'm excited to use it. And then I'm sure Daniel and I will do our best to dumb it down to our level, and hopefully not bore everyone. But decreased neuroplasticity. Fun. It rolls right off the tongue. But essentially, what it is it's when we think about neuroplasticity, it's your resistance level, if you will, or openness to be able to learn new concepts. And so it's your elasticity of your brain's ability to store. And so as you get older, your brain is fuller and fuller and fuller with more and more information. And it becomes harder to find ways to store that memory in ways that doesn't conflict with other memories, right? And so learning can take more time. And so you have to make more connections. You have to rewire certain parts of your brain, if you will, to start to accept and make those connections, where when you're young, those connections don't exist. So you don't have to sort of deconstruct to reconstruct, if you will. And so the reality is, as adults, it's harder to make some of those connections and learn. And so I think that's your first big barrier, is just you already know some stuff, and sometimes you have to relearn that, or things change. The context of the world is different, and you have to make that connection.
I also think on that note, I'll just add this in. I think when you know some stuff, it kind of brings in a little bit of a denial or a resistance where if things contradict, you're always going to go with what you previously learned or what you previously knew, even though it may be wrong, incorrect, or have changed. And that, I think, is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, I think we're very bound typically mentally to cling to the thing we already know, and I have as we work with clients, or even in my own work doing projects and thing, my joking thing is that change is hard. That's what I always tell people. And so the reality is, it takes time and energy, and you have to get people bought in, and they have to believe in what you're trying to deliver to them. And a lot of times they're going to hold on to the thing they thought they knew. And if you think about it, I know this is true for me in all ways. Admitting you are not even wrong, right? Sometimes it's not about being wrong; it's about being misinformed, or it's take the example of Pluto not being a planet anymore, right? This is a little old and dated now. It's been a while since that happened, but at one point I learned that Pluto was a planet, and that was the way it was. And then information changes, and it's not that I was wrong; it's just the world changed, and you have to be willing to accept that. And that's not always easy for adults. I'll give one quick example of neuroplasticity from a kid to an adult, and I only say this because I was having the argument with my 9-year-old today about cleaning his room, and it as we were going to talk about this, it struck me like if you think about a child's or your closet potentially as an adult, if your closet is empty, it's really easy to organize it, and for a child, that's it. If I'm given a new shirt and I need to go to my closet and hang it up, and there's nothing in that closet, there's plenty of space. I just pop it on the hanger, put it on the rack, and I'm good to go. As an adult, though, think about your brain being like that closet, and you've already got a full wardrobe, plus your shoe boxes, plus the photo albums that you're storing in the closet, plus the holiday decorations that somehow ended up in there, plus everything else. And now you get a new shirt, and you have to decide where it's going to go. How does it like? Do you have a coordination system with everything else? Is there room? Do you have to get rid of a shirt to replace that shirt? Do you have to, send some stuff off to Goodwill or sell it or whatever? There's a lot more that goes into getting that new item into that closet because there's a lot of stuff that's already there. That's my simple, maybe my layman's dumbed down version that worked for me of trying to understand that thought process. But hopefully that helps.
All right, barrier number 2. Lack of time. I think in the world we live in today, we all have a perceived lack of time. We're all on the go. We're all busy. Our workday is stretching longer and longer in times. And how do we fit in the ability to learn in today's environment where you're constantly on the go and you maybe don't have time? So the ability to find time to learn is a big part of that, and a lot of people you'll see actually take time out of their day to learn and take on a new skill or try to work on certain things. But in a day when you're a child, when we're comparing the two differences. When you're younger or you're new to something, you learn it instinctively. That's really one of your jobs as a kid, is to just learn on the go and things like that. But as you get an adult, there's other priorities that take place, and new learning or learning of new things isn't necessarily that.
This is definitely the hot topic, right? I mean, it's always the topic we first address with any new client is how do we build in the ability to do this? How do we find time? They're all busy. They're doing things. So this is definitely one we spend a tremendous amount of time trying to problem solve for. All right, let's talk about our third barrier. This one's a weird one and is probably one of the hardest to solve, and we'll explain why when we get to the solving. But financial barriers. Not everything you're going to learn is free. For the most part, if you are an L&D professional, your job is to get this content out. It's related to the business or the organization you work in. But realistically, sometimes what we're talking about is professional certifications, classes. You want to go back and get your master's or your doctorate. You want to be able to just take the local class at the community college on welding, let's say. I don't know. That's more personal to you, but they usually come with some kind of an entry fee or a cost, a tuition. And that can be really tough for a lot of folks to incorporate because we all have bills as adults. And we have a mortgage, or we have families that we need to make sure they get fed and all of that. And so the reality is financial barriers exist when you're in the adult world. You have to start managing money, right? And that is definitely a consideration when you're talking about, can I afford to get the additional education that I need?
Yeah, I think it exists in everybody's life. I think there's courses, there's webinars, there's conferences you can go to, there's online university classes or certifications and all sorts of those things. But that's individual learning. But you think about it from a corporate environment as well. There's the barrier of in-person training. There's the barrier of building a new e-learning curriculum, or launching a new LMS, or launching a training event virtually, which obviously a lot of people have done. So all of those things come into play when trying to train people. So prioritization and understanding what's the most important behaviors you want to change from your organization. And we talk about our overall objectives when it comes to learning theory, but there are a ton of financial barriers that come into play when it comes to learning, either individually or when you're working at a corporation. And balancing those to your priorities is a big part of that theory overall. All right. And our fourth barrier for the day is lack of support, similar to lack of time, but juggling your workload and learning new information is kind of needs a support structure behind it. You have to have people in support of you learning new things. Um, if you're thinking about yourself going to a 5-day conference to learn, bringing new information, you also have to have the support of the people around you. Maybe it's your wife, your husband, your kids. Maybe it's your boss at work or whoever else needs to support you to make sure that you can have them, because there is a lot of juggling that goes in when you have to prioritize learning and expanding yourself into a new area.
And if we take that over to the comparison back to youth learning, right? Kids, everyone gives them dedicated time to go to school. That is the expectation, right? And when you get older, it's not always the case that you're going to be able to say, I'm prioritizing school because that's the thing I do today, or I'm in classes, and I use school in the case of learning and development. I need to go to that session. I need to go to that conference. I need to go to even just to take my self-paced content electronically if it's virtual. And that is what we talk about when we talk about a support structure. Is you don't always have the net where someone says it's okay to prioritize this right now because this is what you need. I need you to get back out on the floor and sell, or I need you to make sure you're going to get the groceries, or I need you to go make sure you are going to the gym. I mean, there's all these things, right, that become noise that we talked about in terms of support. And it's really about, are you able to find the time and get people who encourage you to go do those things? The things that we typically want to make sure we cover off on is, how do you take what we're talking about and turn it into actions and behaviors that help you break down those barriers or help you succeed and achieve the goals that you have in mind and meet those objectives that you have in place. And so that's what we want to focus on our last kind of segment here today. Is we defined some barriers and we gave you the information around, but how do you overcome those things? And so let's spend a few minutes at least talking about the things that you should at least consider, if not actually take action on, to make these less of a barrier, less of an obstacle for your learners, for yourself, for your organization, so that you can be successful. We'll again start with that decrease in neuroplasticity for your learners. Simply, this is about get ahead of it, understand that it exists, and then help design your content in a way that makes sure that users that are going to be consuming your materials are able to overcome that barrier. So again, understanding they have preconceived notions, they have prior experience, they have prior knowledge, and in some cases you're going to need to sort of break that down and change it, is the key here. It's making sure that you with intention plan for that in place so that they have the opportunity to overcome through your training, rather than just kind of force feed them new knowledge.
And one of the things I find with the motivation to overcome this comes down to empowerment, but also the question of what's in it for me. So talking to them about the benefits of learning new things or changing their behavior or not doing things that they typically have done. I think of as a sales perspective. I started my career in digital marketing. So I spent a lot of time around social media. And when I was working in social media and other things, it was very much new to a lot of businesses. Now, to see a business without social media accounts would be like seeing a unicorn. But going to someone who had run their business for 30 years and had been successful and telling them they needed to change the way they were marketing their company or branding their company, to their audience took a lot of resistance, and you had to approach it as, what's in it for them? How is it going to benefit their company? Not just, this is the way things are happening now, do this now. Talk to them about what's in it for them, how what they're going to learn can benefit them and make their life easier, save them money, save them time, all those different things that people care about in day to day, and empower them to be part of that conversation in improving their day to day by learning something. Right. Overcoming lack of time. This is a big topic that obviously I'm super passionate about, and I know Scott is as well. But when we think about learning, offering up bite-sized chunks of information, micro learning, or other types of learnings that are in bite-sized information, that way people can manage the things that are important to them, but also fit in time to learn and be able to go back and use them as resource information. So things like micro learning, bite-sized chunks, or just small manageable learning opportunities that can easily fit into the hustle and bustle of someone's day, are a great way to start overcoming the idea of lack of time.
We had a small moment of technical difficulty there. I think we're back. I think the concept of microlearning, we have drained that extensively, I think, in many of our episodes. And so it is definitely the hot topic, and definitely the way to solve this is giving people that just-in-time training moment that connects everyone's time, keeps it respectful, keeps it on point, that you're wanting to make sure that that's an emphasis for you, and that we're trying to understand that those individuals need the information when they can get it, how they can get it, and just trying to create a promotional plan that supports that. Our next topic was financial barriers, and let's talk about this one because this one's going to be tough. The reality is, as an L&D professional, you probably only have so much voice in terms of how many bonuses or benefit options you can give to people in terms of financial ability to go back and get the training. To me, honestly, on this one, it's tough. I would encourage you from an organizational perspective to be an advocate for learning with your users and individuals who might have decisions that can help with financial resources, whether that be things like tuition assistance, bonus programs for getting certifications or increasing your professional learning, advocating for, maybe it is something simply just to incorporate professional certifications into your own learning programs where you're willing to at least pay the processing fees. Some industries have things like that are built in. These ultimately are good for your company to have more trained, certified people. But to me, from an L&D perspective, it's really about just being an advocate, because you're probably not in a position where you're going to be able to make the decision to increase the financial or the budget that goes along with it, but really advocating and building a strong case to increase those spends for your users.
This is always the one that's scariest for people. But I also have seen, I think organizations or others will always spend money on things that they provide value to. So when Scott talks about, being an advocate, I think coming with the value proposition or the use case for your organization will help strengthen that case. Being a rah type of person around it is good, but making sure you have the business case to support it, and what the benefit for the organization is, what the benefit for the employees are, and then that's always a great place to start. All right, and finally, lack of support. One of the big part about lack of support is really the culture you're involved in. So we always talk about building a learning culture, and within an organization, if you can be part of fostering a learning culture that people are constantly in support of, people bettering themselves, mastering their current role, growing into new roles, understanding new information, that culture will carry through and provide support inherently to the employees that are part of it.
Yeah, learning culture, again, another topic we've spent a lot of time on, right, is your culture within your organization, and how you're encouraging people, and just being, again, that advocate, and providing advocacy for your users with your organization, really trying to focus on the importance of learning within your culture and within your priorities. That is the best way to provide that support. Again, we talked about it, like the idea that children are given the intent that you go to school today. That is your job. Being able to kind of have that same message and say, training today is a priority for you, and we understand it. We will find a way to support you in that. I think is, if you just have that messaging and that's built into the way your organization thinks, that's a support mechanism that can go a tremendous way to making sure people dedicate themselves to that time, because they know they have the backing and the consistent message from. All right, another great episode. I think there's a lot of really good nuggets in there on ways to address your learners and work with your teams. And so I'm really excited we had this opportunity to talk. And we had a few jokes too along the way. Always a good time. And we powered through some strange stuff. So if the editing looks a little weird, no, the internet wasn't our friend today, but we're getting there. But we want to leave you on a happy note. We want to leave you with something positive that's going on in our lives, a little energy for the audience and the listeners today. I will go first. Some of you may have noticed my shirt. It is baseball playoff season, and the Brewers are in. So the family fan team here. The Brewers made the playoffs, so we're excited for them to take on the Braves. We've actually gotten to go see a couple of games this year, so it's been really fun to connect, and the boys are really getting more and more tied to the team. So we're just excited for some baseball playoffs. It's October. It's always a fun time of the year, and hopefully they do well.
All right, mine is it's a tough one, but I love fall. That's what I'm going with. I really love fall. I know summer's over and people can be sad, but I love fall. For me, fall is soccer season. I love the weather of fall. I'm just enjoying a nice cool breeze before the winter shows up. So I'm just enjoying relaxing, enjoying fall, getting through as we approach the holiday season, and just enjoying this time of year. I love everything that comes with it. It's probably the most exciting time of year from a sports perspective as well. And the NFL's back. All the soccer leagues are back in around the world for me. The NBA is starting up, the NHL is starting up, so Sports Center is busy and all that. So it's the month of October is a good one. So I'm excited it's here, and I'm not a big Halloween guy, but I know a lot of people are. So Halloween is approaching. So it's spooky season.
Way to ruin my positivity for our next show. No, just kidding. Although we always go to a big Halloween hayride thing that the boys love every year, so that will be a good time. But yeah, fall is a magical time of the year as well. I know my wife loves it, so it's always a festive time around our house. So, all right, that will do it for us today. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendoza, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks.
Have a good one, buddy.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.